there were warning signs, but this has been. I mean, it's set like I want him to do well. Like I still like the guy.
Yeah,
It
right.
sucks to see, but it's from the
Yeah.
Cubs' perspective, you kind of understand why they moved on.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's so many people. Not, I don't want to say so many people, but we see it on Twitter. So many. It seems like so many people, and I have to remember. I really think Twitter is more so the extreme outlier most of the time,
Hmm.
just because 95 or what feels like 95% of what you're seeing feels like an overwhelming population of people that think this certain way.
Right.
I got to think that this is just the weird universe that we see, and it just feels like it's the ultimate opinion, but it felt like everybody was just, sign Bryant, sign these guys,
Yeah.
keep these guys because of what they did. And I get it. God, if Jed did, if he did somehow resign Baez, Bryant, maybe Baez would have been a little bit
Right.
better anyway, sticking in the Chicago and not going to Detroit. And, Chris Bryant would still have the injury issues. Rizzo was looking pretty decent. And this year, now we know for sure
Yeah. It
he
was the
has that
concussions. Yep.
concussion. Even with Chris Bryant, I mean, whether or not this is really the case, I always go back to the head ball to the head in
Yeah.
18 against the Rockies. I mean, whether or not that's it, it just felt like that can't help.
I get the 2021 trade deadline was traumatic for a lot of people to see
Yeah.
their heroes be traded, but like you can't look at this empirically right now and say like they would be in a better place had they just re-signed all three of those players.
Oh, yeah.
Like
I
there's
mean,
no number that says that would be helpful. They wouldn't have PCA and Alcantara for two of their top four prospects now, five prospects now. It's
yeah. I mean, PCA will probably, you got to figure he's probably got a shot at being up in September, right? Especially sometime next year for sure. But he's in AAA now. Maybe he gets called up in September. Who knows? But
yeah, yeah.
he's progressing through the system fast. So, did you think Matt Mervis would be up again by now, or do you think he's the guy in September too that's probably coming up?
Yeah, that's another possibility for sure. I did think the first one was rushed just because he outperformed so much in AAA. I do think
Yeah.
internally that they had a reason for sending him down to begin with and sort of sat on that. And in the majors, he obviously struggled. I am still optimistic about him long term. I just think a guy with that much power that produces that much in AAA is going to be something. But I could also see that they're seeing something internally. Like, what
Yep.
did he really struggle with? Was it high fastballs in the bigs that he couldn't hit? There was like something they kept attacking him with, and he just couldn't do it at the major league level. Like they could see, okay, let's keep him down for this entire year. Really work on this. Maybe fall league. He could play in the fall league and come up next year and be like more acclimated. Like you don't want to bring a guy up just to have him fail if you know
Right.
it's preventable. No matter what they're doing in the minors. So yeah, it's not like I think they're looking big picture with him.
Well, when he came up in May, he was supposed to be the hero and like the guy that was going to carry the Cubs on his back. And because he had some struggles, he's obviously a bust now, right?
Yeah, exactly. He'll never be good again. No player's ever come up and not immediately been a 5-win player and then turned into something.
Yeah, yeah. I
I
mean,
mean,
Rizzo's struggle. He's obviously had been awful ever since.
yeah, exactly. No, if you don't,
Yeah,
its development is famously linear, right? Like if you just don't get
yeah.
better at every single level and produce, like players never make
Yep.
adjustments or improve.
Nope, never.
I
Nope. So
mean,
Mervis is already written off.
Cody Bellinger, he had those two bad seasons and he never recovered.
It's one of the really good moves that obviously the Cubs did make that's really worked out. Obviously, low risk, high reward, and they've seen the high
Right.
reward of late. And
Mhm.
honestly, how do you? I mean, if you do so, after winning like 8 in a row, it
Yeah.
just feels like the vibe would have just deflated.
Yeah, of
I don't
course.
know. I get some people that would say, don't buy into false hope and get the big time, people that you can get back in a trade, but there's never a guarantee that the prospects you get back are going to do anything, or
Exactly.
maybe they play well. Whether or not they get into the playoffs, play well, keep this vibe going. They build off of that, and it can help your future prospects in terms of how people look at your organization going forward too. I feel like,
Right. And I think too that the way they bought at this deadline, it was pieces that were going to have trouble finding a 40-man spot next year. They traded their 14 and 16th ranked prospects for Candelario, who
yeah,
was a really nice rental bat to pick up. And it's like what they're by not they didn't need to sell to just like boost their system just to do it, right? Like
yeah.
this isn't like it was 2 years ago where there wasn't a lot there and they had to really accumulate prospects externally. Like just by not trading a top 10 prospect or not pushing the chips in with like let's say Jordan Wicks or something, like they kind of stood pat with their system. That's all still there, but they didn't subtract from the major league roster. They can kind of compete while also not like going all in with it, not going full Dombrowski or AJ Preller or whatever, where it's you strain your system to get one player to chase one World Series. Like they're kind of splitting the difference. I think the team as presently constituted is absolutely good enough to win this division, and
Oh
absolutely
yeah,
good enough to. I mean, there's the having three wild card spots is a game changer too, because like competing for that last one, you're not going against like a 100-win team. It's going to be like the Marlins or Diamondbacks or whomever this year. I would have liked to add another reliever, but also none of the relievers you got traded like were game breakers in my view. Like Seawald
yeah.
and Barlow are pretty good, but also like that isn't going to change your fortunes in a major way with or without those. So like I think the way they managed it was good. Like they didn't touch any of the big time prospects. They didn't endanger their future at all, but they also are going to give it a go this year. They added a useful piece in Candelario, and like it's fun to be here on in the middle of August, like still competing for something that hasn't been the way it's
Yeah.
been for 2 years. So it's a good spot.
For the most part, if the offense, I mean, it's not going to happen, but if if the offense can just score an NFL like numbers every game, then you don't even
Exactly.
need a bullpen. So you can
Right.
just score
Right.
14 a game.
Right. Tucker Barnhart can pitch 2 innings a game.
I mean, and it's funny too because they've had a couple of games within the last, well, going back to July, the 17 runs against the Nats and 20 against the Reds. Oh, and then 16 against the Reds. So they're putting up,
Right.
Bears like
Exactly.
offensive numbers.
Yeah, I
So
slipped
yeah,
that one in on
it's
Twitter the other night. People
oh yeah, I saw
just a couple picked
that.
up on it and got angry at me. But yeah, the Candelario thing just kind of fits with what they needed, just more stability from
Yeah,
first and third base and her offensively. And yeah, like they're absolutely coming together as an offense. Like they've probably been the hottest team in baseball since the All Star break, right? Like I don't know who's
yeah,
played
yep,
significantly better. And now it's translating into wins, which hasn't been the case all year. Where they've kind of
yeah.
underperformed their second order numbers. But yeah, it's fun. I mean, we'll see how long it goes, but they've got an easy schedule. They don't have a ton of competition in the division. Milwaukee's
Right.
always an annoyance who seems to always do better than what they probably should do. But
We'll see how it goes. I think it's going to be probably a three-team race, I would assume, down the stretch. But I mean, I don't really think any one team is going to emerge
yeah,
all of a sudden, unless maybe it is the Cubs. Maybe the offense keeps it going, and maybe they can build up some kind of a lead. But I would assume that the top three in the Central will be the way it's been for the most part, in just kind of a
right,
couple of games or so. Yeah, the wild card is definitely a game changer because they're right in the thick of both. It's not like you have to win one or you're not going to get in. It's either a couple games out of the Central, a couple games out of the wild card spot. So it's kind of the best of both worlds right now for a team that I was hoping in going into the year was going to be in that 80, at best, like 80, 85 win range. And that might be the case.
yeah.
Um, but that might be enough too, which is what I was thinking. You
Yeah,
win 80 some games, you're
my
probably,
prediction coming in was 82 wins, but I thought that there was more room to the upside than below that. Like I just thought the floor was going to be
yeah,
high. But like if they
yeah,
had gone 5 wins over that, it wouldn't have surprised me. It would have surprised me more to be at 77 wins, just because like you bring in a 5-6 win player in Swanson, that's going to just kind of be like a high floor type player, like improving from last year. Just thought we'd see some improvement with the pitching staff. They were going to call up some actual talented prospects, but I'm happy to be very wrong saying 82 if they end up winning 88, 89 games. The teams that you see that are really successful year in year out, like the Braves, the Dodgers, the
yeah.
Astros, they build up enough from their own system, depth wise, and they have. It's not just like the Astros turning out Jeremy Pena as soon as Correa left or like that sort of thing. But also they they like find three outfielders to fill in two spots and have a backup like out of their system. And then they go like you can go out and spend big on a star or two around that, but you can't just like completely drain all your depth. And like the Padres had Ruben Odor taking a lot of starts
Yep.
at second, and like Nelson Cruz, who's about 200 years old now, is like their opening. There was a Cruz and Carpenter as their DH platoon, which would have been awesome in 2013. It's not as good now. Like it's great that they like the top four of their order is incredible, but then it really drops off after that, and you just kind of put yourself in a place where you've got sort of a single point of failure. If like Tatis and Soto have a bad stretch, you don't have anything at the bottom of your order to pick that up. Like Whereas the Braves have go 9 deep in their lineup. They have capable players off the bench. They have I mean, they've had I think 8 pitchers in their rotation, and all have been pretty solid this year. Like that's kind of
Yeah,
the ideal, right? Like you have enough internally that you can fill out 26 solid roster spots, but also be able to spend on the one big star or the two big stars, which I'm hoping that's the direction the Cubs are currently going in, where they'll have be able to actually kick up a lot of guys out of the system, but then the pipe dreams Ohtani this offseason, or maybe Soto after next offseason, or whoever. I think
right.
Corbin Burns is up after next season to be able to add that one big name in free agency, but also like that's not where all your chips are pushed in on.
I say just go get all three. Get
Yeah,
Burns,
why
get
not? Why
Soto,
not?
Ohtani. I mean, but yeah, with Ohtani, are you worried about him? Being a guy that probably gets like 500-600 million bucks, and then maybe in 3 years he's a full time DH because the pitching falls off, or he's not going to be able to pitch forever. I assume, even though he is a unicorn and a freak. On the one hand, I'm just like, who cares? Just get him now and just see what happens. You never
I
know.
mean, I don't think that there's a reasonable price I wouldn't pay because
Yeah,
at least for a few years he's going to be your best pitcher and hitter.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Right.
so I mean, we're like, let's say
Win now, worry
he
about it later.
can't pitch anymore for whatever reason, falls off the cliff. Like he could probably take an outfield spot. Like he played outfield
Yeah, that's
in
true.
Japan. So I don't know. Like
Yeah.
I just I can't. He's going to get $500 million from somebody. It just I think it's going to
Oh
be
yeah.
like there's going to be at least 5 or 6 teams that'll offer that. It's sort of where he feels most comfortable. I think Chicago is definitely in the mix. Like
Yeah.
I don't think he wants to go to the East Coast. He's kind of made that clear before. I think part of it's just like proximity to fly back to Japan. But it's like a 12-hour flight from Chicago. It's about 10 and a half from California. So who really cares? I mean, the Dodgers will probably be in it.
Yeah.
Like San Diego
Yeah.
will probably be in it. Seattle's probably going to be in it.
Seattle. Yeah.
But I think it's going to not just be the money, like, because that's going to be a lot from whoever it is. It's going to
It's gonna
be
be there. Yeah.
competitiveness of the team. It's going to be a place he feels comfortable living. It's going to be potential like endorsement opportunities. He also really likes Disneyland, so that could be a factor for the California teams. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's gonna be like a pitch though. It's almost like when he first came over, where they could only pay him the minimum.
Yeah.
So it was sitting down with teams and like going over quality of life in the city and what the team's like plans were to compete. It's now the same thing. It's just going to be a much higher number. Unless like Steve Cohen comes in and like legitimately offers him $1 billion, it's going to be really more about where he wants to play. So
I would definitely take him for sure. I'm not worried about the money. I mean,
yeah,
Ricketts is a billionaire. They could figure that out.
exactly.
It's kind of like when the Cubs signed Hayward, and not that you ever really expected him maybe to fall off and not have the offense, but you're thinking we're all in. We're trying to win now. If we win now, this is worth it. We'll deal
Right,
with it in 3 or 4
100%.
years, and then we'll complain about it in the moment.
Oh, of
But otherwise,
course, of
it's
course.
fine.
No, we'll complain the following 5 years, but really, like, there isn't anything that they did from 2015 to 2020 that I
Yeah,
mean, like, there's guys they didn't add that you can complain about, but like no,
yeah,
you just flags fly forever and all that. Like if you win one World Series, that's worth 10 years of goodwill, even though the Cubs
yeah.
fan base hasn't really given them that. But there's other factors
They
involved
already
there.
they wanted Joe Madden fired the second game 7 was about to begin. They were done with Joe Madden, I think.
Oh no, it's incredible. It's like people still complain about Game 7, which they won, about how he managed. Like he didn't make it easy enough. It's like it was never going to be easy. Come on, it's the Cubs. Like
Right,
they
yeah,
had to
this
go
is the
through the
Cubs we're
ringer one
talking
way or
about.
another. If it's
Yeah, there's no such thing as easy when you're talking about the Cubs. Yeah, Otani is definitely going to be one to watch. I hope they make that happen, or at least are seriously in the conversation. Obviously, you can't say we offered him $200 million, full well knowing he took 500 or 600 for
right,
serious offers. So, yeah, I don't know. I know the Cubs have taken a lot of ownership's taken a lot of grief for things last couple of years, but maybe it's going to end up being the right, path, because they didn't want to spend just to spend when they knew that maybe they weren't ready to contend or win yet. Swanson obviously was that first splash kind of in a
right.
while. And so maybe it is going to be this offseason where they were like, okay, we're all in. We got guys coming up, PCA, or um, we made that push. We got in the playoffs, whatever. I mean, remember the Orioles last year? I don't know. We thought they were going to be like this year, but we
No,
saw last year how they were starting to become not a laughing stock.
right,
And
exactly.
they were like a 500 team last year, and now they are possibly going to win the AL East because Tampa Bay is kind of they're still really good, but they haven't been
Yeah.
as unbeatable. And I don't know that the Cubs are going to be the best team in baseball next year, but they're definitely. It looks like they're finally on that trajectory of what you would have hoped for.
Yeah, and like I think there's stuff to knock ownership spending on in like 2017 and 18. They could have gone out and got Lorenzo Cain, which would have won them another division, or Harper was
Yeah,
obviously out there. I think a
yeah,
lot of the decision making after that though was actually like we need to pivot our organization in
yeah,
terms of like the our key players are declining in value. They're going to hit free agency like we have nothing in the system. Like it felt more like strategic baseball decisions than like just being cheap.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I mean, this is going to be a good test in the next two off seasons. Like, I personally believe this ownership group will spend when they think it makes sense to spend. Like when they
Right.
think they're close, they won't care about belonging to the luxury tax. I mean, I don't know if they'll spend $400 million on payroll like the Mets are close to, but if it's to get Shohei Ohtani or if it's to get like another pitcher that really solidifies the rotation, I don't think that's going to be a problem. I think
Yeah,
a lot of
agree.
stuff you can look at in the last 2 years is a lens of like what was best for like a baseball decision, not about financial reasons.
That's the way I think about it. Yeah,
When you're close, like, and you can add, you can't build a roster through free agency, but you can complete a roster in free agency. And I think when the Cubs are nearing a point where they're in that like complete the roster in free agency mode. So that's adding, maybe you pay two relievers a little bit over market and like just eat it that way. But like the Orioles are in the case now where like they are well suited to go out and spend in free agency, but I don't know that Angelos is going to do that necessarily. I think that's a team
yeah,
that's going to be really interesting to watch what they end up doing. But like they need to go out and sign one of the free agent pitchers that hits this winter, like Nola or Giolito, or if Stroman opts out, something like that. And if they don't go out and pony up $100 million to sign Aaron Nola for 3 4 years, like then it really calls into question how committed they are to actually optimizing that roster. But for the Cubs' sake, like
yeah,
I don't know. I would be very surprised if they didn't go through the luxury tax next year. At least be in on Ohtani, sign a pitcher as well. Like I just don't think that's going to be a concern. Whereas I don't know, like you can knock them for stuff 5 years ago, but right now it just seems like they were trying to realign strategically for being the best position in 2023.
Well, I know there was a lot of fire Jed takes, basically all up until maybe the last few weeks, because why not, right? You
Yeah, of
got to fire
course.
everyone that doesn't.
If you don't
You're not
immediately win, he should
162.
be fired.
Yeah, he didn't do that. I think I had even heard, like ownership was basically telling Jed, "Yeah, spend this money," and he was like, "No, I'm not ready to." I think that's what I was hearing, or
Gotcha.
that's what Jed was basically saying. But I don't know. I don't know. Apparently, he had. I think it was Jed, and I guess he had the resources available, but he was like, "I'm not ready to utilize this yet. I don't want to spend this money just to spend it if we're not really." We don't feel right or we don't feel ready. So, yeah, Swanson's been like one of the best shortstops of that group from last offseason that the
Right.
Cubs were able to get, and that's really worked out
It was the
well.
biggest decision Jed had to make was
Yeah,
in that shortstop market. And actually going back a year before with Baez out there as well, and somebody else was too that I can't think of right now. But like this year with the four big free agents hit in
yeah,
with Bogarts, Turner, and Correa, like he got that completely correct. And he
yeah,
basically signed the one that was the least flashy, who's been the best performer, and who seems to
yeah,
love playing here, and play. The fans are big like into him and all that. Like that is worth a lot more to me in terms of evaluating Jed as good at his job than like signing Eric Hosmer for the league minimum and cutting him after 2 months is. Like, people want to
yeah.
knock mistakes, but like when you're paying $170 million for a shortstop, like you have to get that right, or else it really has long term ramifications. And they nailed it. Like, and they went against conventional wisdom, which everybody wanted Turner, everybody wanted Correa, and they got it right. So that's great to see.
It would have been great if the Mets did get Correa because that would have just added fuel to that fire.
Yeah,
Just
definitely.
And I know Trey Turner's been getting booed in Philly, although I think he got like a standing O the other day as like a
Yeah,
as like a we still believe it. But he'll be fine, I think. But that's also Philly. I mean,
right.
that's they'll boo
Well, no,
anybody
it's.
for any
I was
reason
actually
anyway.
watching. They gave him a standing ovation, and then he softly lined out to second, and they started booing.
Yeah, of
So they
course.
they gave him one chance, and now it's
Reverse psychology. Let's actually try to cheer him. We'll like will
exactly.
this manifest it. Okay, never mind. He's a
Yeah.
bust.
Well, and the announcers were like working overtime to talk about how great Philly fans are and how supportive they are, and It's like, well, they booed him as soon as he didn't like hit a home run, so it only goes so far.
Yeah. So David Ross. So a lot of people want him fired, of course, usually. This is the guy that I get it. You got to separate what he did 7 years ago to now, but this is the guy that did hit a home run in his
Yeah,
last
exactly.
game as a player to help the Cubs win the World Series. He becomes a manager. It's either what is he doing? Horrible, awful, should be fired, not serious, or oh yeah, maybe this is actually decent. It depends on what you're looking at that day.
Sure.
But where do you come across Ross now? So what's the vibe on David Ross for you?
So I have come around a little bit on him as a
Yeah.
good manager. I mean, I think he does stuff that does seem obviously kind of dumb intra
Yeah.
game, but I think with evaluating managers, you sort of have to like zoom out and look like big picture at stuff because something that happens a lot is like he brings in a reliever gives up the lead. It's like, well, why didn't you bring in the other guy? It's like, well, we don't know what the other like. There's a lot of
Yeah.
what's the next best option.
Randomness.
I'll
Yeah.
say up front, I don't really care about lineup construction outside of like not making obvious mistakes. Like Tucker Barnhart leading off would be a problem, but if a
Yeah.
guy's batting fifth or a guy's batting seventh, I just don't really care that much. Most of the time, they get the same amount of at bats. Like there should be a few things that make sense, but like the lineup tweet comes out every day and everybody loses their mind. It's like I just don't really care that much. Like I just want
Yeah.
the correct nine players in there, whatever order it is. Who care? Um, Bullpen usage is wonky. It's sort of hard to quantify like what the optimal bullpen usage is. I think a lot of the stuff in May that I was most upset about ultimately was just like he didn't have any good relievers to turn to.
Yeah.
I had some issue with like it took a while to find correct roles for everybody, which should be sort of hammered out by the end of April. But now they've kind of
Yeah.
reached that point. Like Alzala is the closer, like Leiter's like the fireman, and especially against lefties. Merriweather is getting some good spots to pitch, and I think Palencia is sort of becoming a middle innings. Bring him in like a clean inning, and he can. He has some walk issues, but other than that, he's got some great stuff. So that works out. So I don't know how much of that was necessarily David Ross being an idiot, or just like
Yeah.
he had a lot of bad options and just was having trouble putting the pieces together.
That's kind of what I would. Yeah. Probably trying to
Um,
juggle, make the most of something that you don't know at the time.
Exactly. So here's my contrarian viewpoint. I'm going to defend David Ross. I never thought I'd do, but this is looking at things, taking a step back and like looking at actual performance. Somebody who's a lot smarter than me about this, Russell Carlton, wrote a book, and in the book he has a chapter about evaluating managers, right? Like, and a lot of the stuff people look at that they call the manager an idiot or a genius, like you just can't really separate good from bad by looking at that. There's stuff we don't know about, right? Like maybe a relief pitcher isn't feeling very well that day, so you're trying to
Yeah.
hold him back. It's like, oh, why didn't you bring in
Yep.
Elzalai here? It's like, well, he's actually got a pretty bad cold, like he was just there in an
Mhm.
emergency role, whatever. Or guys having a
Yep.
bad day, stuff we don't see that
Hung
like
over the night before.
exactly. I didn't want to go
Yeah.
there. Yes, maybe they had a big
Right.
night on
Yep.
the town. Maybe Cody took one too many edibles. He's not really good to
Yeah.
that high in the order, whatever. And like these
Yeah.
little decisions of guy A over guy B in one game doesn't make a big difference in the grand scheme of things. But Russell Carlton's theory is that the best way to evaluate managers is because the baseball season's long, the best managers outperform in the second half of the year. That they are good at managing rest, at keeping everybody engaged for a 6 month season. Like I'm sure, even as a professional, when you get to the middle of the season, you're just like, all right, I got to wake up early, get to this, like prepare to face a top 50 pitcher in the world. Like things are going to get kind of slip. And his case was the
Yep.
best managers are guys who outperform in August and September. At the time he wrote this book like 6 years ago, like he put out his list of by his metric of like outperformance in the back half of the season, his top five managers, and like anybody who looked at that list would like agree with it. Just sort of, yeah, I think these are five of the let's say seven best managers in the game. Like Madden was on the list at
Yeah.
the time, Bruce Bochy, that sort of thing. So it sort of made sense. So using that metric, I prepared some stats here. So here's been David Ross in September relative to Joe Madden in his last two seasons. So 2018 Cubs, they won 95 games, but September 571 winning percentage is their second worst month of the season. 2019, 407 winning percentage in September, their worst month of the season. Ross gets hired in 2020. We'll throw that year out because it was the COVID year, 60 games. Who cares? All right, 2021, after they traded everybody, September, October record, 500, their second best month of the year with Frank Schwindel and Rafael Ortega and what was the guy? John Wishi Fargas playing key roles.
Oh, right, Vargas, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of Cubs legends that year. Then
Yeah.
2022, September, October, their best month of the season, they had a 600 winning percentage in September after trading guys at the deadline as well. Also last year, first half, 380 winning percentage. After they traded everybody, 557 winning percentage in the second half. This year, like we said, hottest team in baseball since the All-Star break. If you want to look at that as a benchmark for like actually evaluating managers, David Ross has been very good at keeping his teams engaged in the second half of the year, late into the year, and actually improving over time. Time will tell. We'll see how they do at the end of this year, but there could be
Yeah.
something there that isn't seen when you're evaluating on like a game by game basis.
Yeah.
Him putting the wrong reliever in or batting Nick Madrigal too high. It's like, well, maybe big picture, he's very good at resting guys appropriately or keeping them playing 6 good months of baseball, um, and not burning out in May or whatever. So I thought that was interesting though, just that like Ross seems to get Ross's team seem to get better as the year goes on, which
Like last year, yeah.
by this really good baseball prospectus writer who worked for the Mets, like said that's the best way to look at a manager. So I don't know. I didn't think I'd be coming on to defend him, but I do think that there's something to be said that they play a full 6 month season, whereas other teams have more of a drop off. And if that's Ross's doing it anyway, it's a real credit to him.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I know last year they were kinda surprising there really, towards the end a little bit or just kind of just being competitive, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's true, and then, yeah, like you said, 2020 throw it away, but that was technically a playoff team for what that's worth,
Right.
so, and then, of course, it's always hard anyway to aside from obvious game mismanagement or whatever on a day to day basis, it's so hard to know how much is a guy like David Ross in control of his lineup, or um, what's he having to deal with from the front office, or
Hmm.
what's the roster that he has to play with. You don't have you get rid of all your best guys in 2021, so what do you expect? You're not really going to have much of a season or a team to um, really be able to work with or contend with. So there's so much randomness anyway that goes into the
Exactly.
whole baseball. I think more than maybe more than any other sport. I just feel like it's so hard to know how much is the manager too much blame, too much credit. It's hard to say who, you could kind of tell like when a guy like you said Bruce Bochy, Joe Madden, like Joe Torre back in the day,
Right.
like they had a really solid uh whatever it was. Something about them is why they were able to do what they were able to do, but
Mhm.
still there's just so much randomness at play.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that really bothered me with Ross's teams in the first half of the year, or Ross's team this year in the first half of the year, is they just seemed like they made a lot of dumb mistakes. Like they just played a really stupid
Yeah.
brand of baseball. That's kind of been buttoned up lately. I mean, I think the best thing you can ask out of a manager is just that like he gets the team ready to play at the same level every day, at a high level. Because like once you hit the professional ranks, like what's a coach going to tell you about hitting the cutoff man or something? Like you should be able to do that
Yeah.
on your own. But like to build a culture where everybody shows up early and works hard and prepares themselves the best way possible, and like guys are resting adequately, so they're as good on opening day as they're on game 162. Like that's what I'd want to see. And I don't know. Like I honestly don't know if that's happening, but like the statistics kind of show that it is. So
Yeah.
that'd be the case to keep them. I don't know. It's always fun to blame the manager because people hate blaming the players. Like we like the players.
Yeah.
Blame the guy who's standing there telling them what to do.
Do you remember, like, obviously you remember Nick Castellanos and the Cubs got him at the
Yep.
deadline. He was like the guy.
Nuclear.
They
Yeah.
didn't keep him, and it was disappointing. Do you feel like Candelario? I'm not saying he's Castellanos, but kind of that same vibe right now. It's only been a few games, obviously, since they
Sure.
got him, but just coming and raking all of a sudden, and kind of just keeping that vibe going, or even enhancing that vibe, the offense. He's producing right away. Who knows how long that's going to continue? He's a really good player, so
Yeah.
you expect at least, but yeah, it kind of brought that vibe back a little bit, at least so far. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of lost because he plays for the Nationals, which don't get a lot of
Yeah,
attention for probably good reason this year, but like he's been really good this season. I think it was Brendan Miller posted some like heat map charts of his, and like he's turned from he used to have a pretty bad weakness like up in the zone, especially velocity up in the zone. Like he's been really good at that this year. So there's actual tangible changes underlying his performance. So like he's a good player to begin with, and like now he goes from playing for a last place team to somebody who's right in the heart of the race with sold out stadiums every night. Like that's got to
yep,
give you bit of wind under your sails if you're him. Yeah, and the thing is, they don't need him to be what Castellanos was in 2019. It's
Yeah.
2019 when they got him, where like they needed him to be their number two hitter and actually put up what he was putting up because that offense was pretty bad. He's batting sixth for them, and he's adding depth to the lineup. And if he can do just what he was doing before he got traded, like that, my biggest concern about this team was just like how extending that lineup out. And obviously Bellinger playing at a near MVP level has helped that, but like I thought that they'd kind of be clustered. They'd have some talent at the top, but like getting 6 through 8, 6 through 9 like hitters was going to be a problem. Like
Yeah.
Candelario just gives them a ton more at the bottom of that order and like a real power threat. And they don't need him to be
Yeah.
a MVP. They just need him to do what he was doing, and that's all of a sudden a pretty competitive lineup that could put up against just about anybody.
Yeah, when he's doing that and Swanson's hitting home runs almost what feels like every game now, and Bellinger is being Bellinger.
Right.
I mean, yeah, like you said, it's a legitimate threat in that lineup now, and it didn't always feel that way. But yeah, it's been fun, obviously, to see these guys mashing
It's
and
like Nick Madrigal as a nine hitter can just kind of be what he like. He doesn't have to be incredible. Like if he can just be a
yeah,
pest in that nine hole and get on base at like a 340, 350 clip, like all of a sudden you've got a good lineup top to bottom. Like there isn't, you're not going to have one inning where you're just like looking at who's due up and like, yeah, we're done. We're not going to score here.
do you want to see them keep Bellinger long term, or because I think before the year, weren't you thinking like he's blocked? I mean, not he's blocked, but he would be blocking like PCA or whatever. But if he's playing, I was gonna say first base, but I don't know if Candelario is gonna be in their future going forward either.
Sure,
But
sure.
I mean, what do you think about giving a guy like Bellinger whatever long term deal that would look like?
Yeah, I mean, I've come around. Like again, the devil's in the details in terms of like what the actual numbers are. I would rather not pay him
Yeah,
as a center fielder to play first base.
yeah, yeah,
But with the way he's played this year, like it's going to be hard to not at least be heavily engaged on bringing him back. PCA, like their number one prospect plays center field, and their number two position prospect plays center field. So you're getting a bit of a logjam there, but also like there is outside of Ohtani, there isn't a better hitter on the market this winter. He is a perfect fit for this lineup. They seem to have fixed whatever was wrong with him in LA. I mean, he's the NL Player of the Month in July and for good reason. I would have a tough time letting him walk for unless it's just some ridiculous salary that he gets. Like, but I think up to 160, 180 million is for 6 years is pretty reasonable for what he could be.
yeah,
I don't know. It's like I was trying to find like comps because there's obviously risk involved too. Like that shoulder injury made him a pretty bad hitter for 2 years. Like if he suffers another injury, how's that going to affect his swing long term? So maybe that gets priced into the contract. But like because they knew they'd be moving off center field. Like George Springer got 160 from Toronto, and like that seems like a comfortable number for everybody involved with Bellinger.
yeah, yeah,
Like like Springer's a more consistent hitter, but he can't play center anymore, and like that's kind of the trade off with Bellinger. Like he's been very good, but also there's risk involved, and you might be moving him to make room for PCA, so you might be moving to first base long term, or something would happen with Hap, maybe left field long term. I mean, Hap's extended already, but you never know. Like teams make decisions all the time like that. So yeah, I don't know. Like it again. Like I don't think you pay him as like Mike Trout money, but I think there's a price that works, and like he's been so good, it's hard to see him go.
Well, the good news is this: if the Cubs do keep Bellinger and it doesn't work out long term, Jed's an idiot. If they
Right.
don't let him, if they don't keep him, he's an idiot. Even if he ends up being awful afterwards.
Precisely.
If PCA comes up and strikes out, he's a bust. So I
Right.
mean,
Right.
there's absolutes no matter what the scenario, which is the great thing.
The key is you get to go online and assert that you're smarter than the people are actually running the team, who have been doing this their entire lives. And I think running a baseball team is the toughest executive job in pro sports, just because there's so many
Oh yeah,
levels you have to manage. Like there's 5 minor league levels, and like
yeah.
even the draft. Like if you had NHL GMs try to do like a baseball style draft, I think they would all just quit on the spot. Or you have to factor in like signability and give them a cap on that. So I don't know. Like
Ugh,
obviously you want among that group, you want the best one possible. But I don't think it's as
yeah.
simple as like, well, if they just did what I said, they'd be fine.
I asked Evan Altman before the season back in December. I was like, "What do you grade? What kind of grade do you give Jed?" And I believe his answer was an incomplete, which made sense because it was hard to say. He got Swanson, but there were still things to do and things to see how they were going to play out. And I'm not ready to say he's Theo, and I'm not ready to say he should be fired. I feel like
Right.
when you look at the when you said, you zoom out and look at the big picture, it's kind of like, all right, maybe he has an idea of what he's doing here, and not overpaying for guys that people wanted to keep versus getting the right guy in free agency. I mean, there's got to be. I think he probably has an idea what he's doing.
Yeah. Well, I completely agree with Evan's grading there. I would still say incomplete,
Yeah,
though,
same.
like skewed
Yeah,
towards the better side of that. I just think his
yeah,
plan since 21 has been 2024 is like the year they really are shooting for. Like that's when his plan comes together. And if you look at all the prospects that like that's like their ETA to make the majors. Like PCA might be up this year, but it was always looking at like a 24 timeline. Horton, I definitely think they're saving for the second half of next year. Wicks is probably a 24 contender. But like I thought his whole plan was to build assets around that and then bring up like all their prospects they really liked around that time. And also have other prospects that they could maybe flip this offseason or at the deadline next year or whatever. So if they bomb next year, I'm going to have a pretty negative view on Jed's plan. Like if none of these prospects work
of
out, like, all
course.
right, you
Yeah,
built for this and it didn't happen. But the fact that they're
yeah,
contending this year, which I think was sort of an expectation that they wouldn't be the Braves or the Dodgers, but they would be in the race. And
yeah,
like next year actually have a really good team again. Like that's on track right now. So
yep.
I think next year is where I really start to think like, is he the guy long term? But so far he's gotten more right than wrong. And if his plan was a 3 year pivot to contend again, like it's on track. Like there's not a lot you can really knock on that strategy.
But I mean, Jeff, they're in third place, so
Yeah,
obviously they should be in
exactly.
the negatives, right?
So here's the thing. This is my nerdy math tangent, but hear me out. Probabilities. I guess that's the biggest thing. We'll evaluate probabilities rather than possibilities. That narrative, nothing has driven me more crazy on Twitter this year than that. And I've changed my Twitter handle to Run Differential Insider. The idea that, like, okay, so they have a really good run differential. They're underperforming as of the last time I checked by 7 games. Base runs, it's even better. I think they're underperforming by 8 games. If you look at that and you just look at if you take out any emotion about the Chicago Cubs, you look at that throughout time, what's more likely? A team that has this awesome run differential that's underperformed it in the win loss column to play better and win more games, win more, to use a semi NHL term, greasy games, and like win more 1 run games or just have the converge like actual win loss to projected win loss, or oh no, they're actually down here and all this run differential stuff, which you cannot fake in any way, no matter what people say. Like they're gonna lose a bunch of games by 10 runs, and that'll come back to earth. The narrative you have to construct to say their run differential is not indicative of their team of their ability, but their win losses is like insane. It's like they're only playing bad teams, and when they play the bad teams they win by 12, but when they play the good teams they get blown. It's like, well, none of that bears out in the stats. It's not how any of this stuff tends to work. You can have like you can outperform a bad run differential and have a better win loss, but it usually doesn't go the other direction in the grand scheme of things. Like the Brewers typically outperform their projected wins because they have a good bullpen. They win close games. This year they've got a good defense. Like I can buy that just with how the team's constructed. It's really hard to go the other way and like have it make sense long term. Usually those that
Yeah.
cream like rises to the top over time. So yeah, it's such a dumb narrative because it just doesn't make a lot of logical sense like when you try to break out what's actually happening. So I think like now what we're seeing with them winning games is more indicative of who they are when you look at the second order win stats, but we'll see how that holds up over time.
Yeah, they don't make the playoffs, or they're a positive run differential, but every other team in the Central is negative, then obviously they were focusing on the wrong area or something.
You've also just got people who want to hate them at all times or just want to
Oh, of
they've
course.
they've dug in so much that this is like the worst team and poorly run and everything sucks that they like have to just pick out the data points that fit that, and it just like doesn't make sense. Like as soon as they got over 500, it's like, oh, they're still in third place. Like, well, yeah, they can't control like that. The Reds won games over that time. They can't play two different teams in the same night. Like,
Yeah, that was my tweet, but obviously people are starting to catch on, I guess, because I'm not getting not nearly enough negativity and flack for stuff I say anymore.
yeah,
So
it's a tip off that it's probably
yeah,
making fun of the meta sense of Cubs Twitter.
exactly. Yeah, I think people have pretty much realized. I can't remember what it was recently where I said something and it had a positive, and everybody was like knew that it was a fake or it wasn't legit, whatever I had said or commented. But yeah, before we close, so this team
Yeah,
right now, 2023 Cubs. What do you compare them to, I guess? Like, do you think of the '03 Cubs, the '07 Cubs, or do they even have that same,
It's a great question. I think they're a better team than the '07 Cubs were, which was more of a
Yeah,
product of just being in a bad
agree.
division and kind of muddling along until the playoffs,
Yeah,
where they
yeah.
played, I mean, a Diamondbacks team that wasn't awesome, but was better than they were. And
Yeah,
due to
yeah.
a number of circumstances, lost that series. This is maybe a Cub, like a diet 2015 Cubs, where they
Okay, yeah,
are playing better as the year goes on, but they haven't. It's not because of like all their prospects are up here. Like that team just infused so much talent in the first half that it sort of clicked at the same time. They haven't called up like their Chris Bryant or their at the time we had high hopes for Addison Russell until he turned out to be a terrible person and
yeah,
whatever. But like that sort of thing, like Arrieta went into God mode for the second half of the year. They're not winning. It's weird because it's like that was a run that I think is similar in terms of win loss and like ability as this year's team, but that was because of a few concentrated, really high end performances. Whereas this is like everybody's playing really well all of a sudden. Not,
yeah,
a couple of small exceptions, but like this isn't just Cody Bellinger hitting a bunch of home runs and powering him over. Like Justin Steele going out and putting up a 1 ERA in the second half. Like this is everybody's playing well at the same time, and they're jumping from like middling first half to really like looking like they can beat anybody at this time. If they, win the series with the Braves, I feel like you can make that statement pretty safely that they can play with anyone. So
yeah,
I'd say like 2015, but different circumstances, like different ways it's happening, but it's like the same trajectory. Like I said on Twitter, the Talkman thing is like their Chris Bryant walking off the Rockies in 2015 moment, where it's that was a big swing game for them. They won in dramatic fashion, but instead of it being the top prospect in baseball hitting a walk-off home run. It's like the journeyman is having the year of his life making a big catch. Like I think that's kind of an appropriate metaphor though for how they're doing it. It's Talkman's playing great, or like Nick Madrigal's finally becoming a playable major leaguer. Swanson's playing to kind of the high end of what you would expect him to be able to do, and Bellinger's resurging. Like it's just all these things kind of bubbling together to be good. So yeah, I'd say Diet 2015.
yeah. Well, when the Cubs probably don't win the World Series this year, Jed should have sold at the deadline. So,
Yeah, of course. Yeah, unless you're one of the top two teams in baseball, you should just trade all your good players to one of the top two, and just that's how it should work because there's no such thing as good enough.
yeah, I do feel like if they were to sell at the deadline, especially after losing the eight or after winning the eight in a row or whatever, it just feels like I mean, I don't know. I know they're a big market team and they can spin if they want to,
Right.
but maybe a guy like whether it's Otani or whoever looks at it and goes, "Well, are you serious about winning or not?" Like you just,
Yeah.
there people are looking. There's a perception too. So I feel like it just shows that they were ready to like let's just do this. Let's try to contend here and build off of that.
Yeah,
So
and players talk too, right? Like
yeah,
the Cubs have a very good reputation for like their facilities and how they take care of their players, but it's also I don't know, like if Bellinger does hit free agency and he's talking to Boris, like you want Boris to tell other players that the Cubs might be considering, like, oh, like he really liked playing there, and they seem to like it's a clubhouse that cares about winning, and it's not just seeing it from our perspective, but like these guys all know each other, they all communicate, and if they're hearing glowing things about the Cubs' commitment to being a World Series contender, it's gonna trickle down throughout the league. So it's definitely good they're trying, and I brought this up on Twitter, but like are they that much worse than the Phillies were last year, a year ago? Like that team was mediocre for 6 months, and then turned it on in the
yeah,
playoffs. They didn't have a big run. Like I think they made it with middle of the 80s wins. They never had a period where they looked like, oh, the Phillies are world beaters. But
yeah.
they played well at the right. They got it, and they played well at the right time.
Hmm.
And like I just don't think this team. This team is I think maybe 2 or 3 games worse win loss record wise. But like I don't think they're much worse than a team that made the World Series last year. It's just about getting in and then who you play and how you play against them. So it's
Yeah.
I don't know. There's reasons to tune in. There's reasons to believe in them, and I think it only gets better from here.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I think they've definitely trended in the way we would hoped when we talked last year around this
Right.
time. We were hoping they'd even be into this point. So maybe next year they will be the Atlanta Braves and going 100-0 or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Well, you
Or
get
maybe the
Ohtani,
Orioles,
all of a
but
sudden it becomes a lot of things become a lot more possible in terms of optimism.
yeah. Well, it was good to chat again and
Absolutely.
we'll definitely keep up on Twitter and just keep tweeting ridiculous statements and see what people believe and
Oh, it's
don't
the
believe.
best,
And
right? It's the absolute best to when you just drop, like I dropped proposal to trade Taylor McGregor at the trade deadline for Kelly
oh,
Cole,
yeah,
and I got
yeah.
some incredible feedback on that one. So don't worry, I won't stop tweeting absolute nonsense to try to pull in the people who don't read it critically.